Coming to get you, Barbara.
Zombie 2 is a zombie horror movie directed by noted Italian director Lucio Fulci. But before I review it, I should address some of the confusion that goes along with it. A lot of the confusion has to do with the title. I'm referring to it as Zombie 2 in the title of this video because the print I watched had Zombie 2 as the title. However, although this was the title upon its original release in Italy, it has a few other titles. IMDb lists 30 different titles for the movie. Although it's common for a movie to have different titles in different languages, I just want to highlight a few. In Italy, it's Zombie 2, and you might wonder what it's a sequel to. Well, it was actually marketed as a sequel to Dawn of the Dead, which in itself was a sequel to Night of the Living Dead. In Italy, Dawn of the Dead was called Zombie, so Lucio Fulci named his movie Zombie 2 to capitalize off of the Romero movie, even though his movie had nothing to do with it. You gotta wonder what Italians thought when Day of the Dead came out, which in Italy was called The Day of the Zombies. Anyway, so in Italy it's called Zombie 2, even though it's not really a sequel to anything. When it was released in England, it was called Zombie Flesh Eaters, and the rest of Europe it's generally referred to as Island of the Living Dead. When it was released in America, it was just called Zombie, which gets more confusing because the sequels, Zombie 3 and Zombie 4, which, by the way, have nothing to do with the original, even though Zombie 3 was partially directed by Fulci, did not change the titles in America, meaning that in America there's a Zombie 3, and a Zombie 4, but no Zombie 2. Whew. It's best to just watch it and not worry about all that. It's not a sequel to Dawn of the Dead or any other movie, and is really a standalone film. Anyway, let's talk about the plot. In the beginning shot, you see a human figure covered in a bedsheet and tied up, and then someone off-screen shoots it in the head. It's a jarring opening, and something that won't be explained until more than halfway into the movie. After this, it starts off in New York City, where a seemingly empty boat drifts into the harbor. The Coast Guard investigates, figuring that the ship's owner and any passengers had abandoned it for unknown reasons, but when one of the officers investigates the downstairs, he's attacked by a zombie and killed. The other officer shoots the zombie several times, and it falls into the water. The police start investigating the murder, and they find that the owner of the boat has gone missing, but they find his daughter lives in the city, so they question her. But she has no idea what's going on, and actually has been worried about her father, who has been missing for over 3 months. Also investigating is a reporter who doesn't believe the police's version of events makes sense. They both wind up skulking around the boat looking for clues and nearly get caught by the police, though they pretend to be a couple looking for a discreet spot to bone. Anyway, they agree to join forces and find her father's journal, which suggests that he's on an island somewhere in the Virgin Islands called Matul. They travel down to the tropics and hook up with a young couple vacationing by touring several local islands on their boat. The foursome look for Matul, which is uncharted, though along the way, at some point, Susan, the young woman, is scuba diving and gets freaked out by a shark. Her husband Brian shoots at the shark with a gun, which freaks the shark out and it damages the ship. Then she's attacked by an underwater zombie. When she gets away from it, the zombie attacks the shark. I'm not even joking, this movie has a scene where a zombie fights a shark. The ship is damaged, but they manage to make it to the nearest island, which happens to be Matul. There they meet Dr. Menard, who has been combating a deadly disease creeping across the island which kills people and raises the dead. His patients eventually die, and he's forced to shoot their corpses in the head to prevent them from rising. The natives believe that voodoo magic causes the zombies, but Dr. Menard feels there has to be a scientific rationale. We found out that he was friends with the missing father, who came to visit him often, but eventually contracted the disease and died, and Menard was forced to put a bullet in his brain, which is what the opening scene was. Anyway, soon enough the zombies are completely overrunning the island, and the survivors have to do everything they can to get away, but shit just keeps getting worse. They manage to get away from a group of zombies who had killed the doctor's wife, but while driving away they run over a zombie and lose control of the car, which causes the reporter to get injured. They try to walk back to the hospital, but when they try to rest for a bit because of the injury of the reporter, they get attacked by extremely desiccated zombies who rise from an ancient Spanish graveyard, and Susan gets killed. They board themselves up in a hospital and fight off zombies with Molotov cocktails and guns that seem to have unlimited ammo and seem on the verge of getting away, but Brian, who had been kicking all sorts of ass, freezes up at the sight of his dead wife, who comes back as a zombie. I'm personally reminded of the scene in Night of the Living Dead when Barbara sees her brother Johnny as a zombie and completely loses it and winds up getting torn apart by the dead. The three manage to get away, though Brian got bit by a zombie and is infected. They take a ship back to New York City and debate about what to do about Brian. Anne wants to shoot him to prevent him from becoming a zombie, as he is already dying from the infection. But the reporter claims that he is their only proof that anything happened. But it's a moot point as they arrive back in New York City to find it's been completely overrun by zombies. It's a jarring ending, and a real shame that the sequel never picked up on this. And in fact, it was another story involving another island, so anyway, overall, generally Zombie 2 seems like nothing special with its cookie-cutter plot, but what makes this movie great is not the story, which is as predictable as they come, but the images in the movie. Remember, when it comes to zombie movies, it's not what you do, but how you do it. There's 3 scenes that always stand out to me. One is the zombie fighting the shark, which is something so ridiculous that you can't help but think it's awesome. The second is the scene where the doctor's wife is pulled into a door by a zombie and her eye is gouged out by a sharp piece of wood. The eye impalement became Lucio Fulci's trademark and something that you'd see in a lot of Italian horror films. It's extremely visceral, and in a movie that is already extremely violent and bloody, it's one of the hardest scenes to watch. The third is a subtle bit. Right before everything goes haywire, you see a shot of a few shambling zombies moving through the village. And if you look closely, you can see a big-ass crab scuttling through the streets carrying a severed human hand. It's little touches like this that really make the film interesting. Fulci's zombies are also visually striking. They're rotted and desiccated and have worms falling out of their eyes, skin hanging in flaps, and when they're shot, they splatter blood everywhere. Another scene that tickles me is when the doctor gets it. A zombie literally sneaks up on him and bites his face off. Totally a zombie sneak attack. Though it's not as good as Romero's Dead movies, and it has a cliched plot and typical movie errors such as characters never having to reload their weapons. Zombie 2 is a fun film that is full of extremely violent images, it has an iconic soundtrack, and some of the most frightening zombies that you'll see. In most horror films, a lot of the times the horror comes not from what you see, but from what you don't see. But this trope is completely inverted in zombie films for the most part, which often depict everything. And Zombie 2 is a prime example. I'm going to give Zombie 2 an 8 out of a possible 10.